right. So we had a bit of a tech issue here at the beginning. Looks like Mark lost power, but they're back on the circuit again. So we're good to keep going. So Mark, we are talking today about the unknown connection between trust and intimacy. And for those that didn't miss the tiny little segment that we were just started a few minutes ago, we just noticed that a lot of people in the group were talking about this lack of closeness between them and their spouse and this lack of intimacy. We'll go deeper into that later and what some of those blocks are that cause intimacy, and then this surprising and unknown connection between trust and intimacy that no one else is talking about. So we're excited to share that with you. If you're watching, let us know that you can see and hear us okay, especially since we just had to take two on this live stream today. And if this is your situation, if you're feeling like the gap between you and your spouse is getting further and further apart, let us know that you're there. Let us know so that we can help you out with that. So, Mark, here we go again. All right. So what are some of the things that block intimacy in a relationship?
Great. And I'll repeat a little bit of what I was saying earlier, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page here. So as far as what blocks intimacy, we need to understand that connection there, like Heather was mentioning, between trust and intimacy. Just the fact is that if you don't have that trust, if you don't have that safety, that security, if you don't feel comfortable with things, it's going to be next to impossible for you to feel close and intimate with someone else. Quite frequently when I'm teaching people about this principle, I talk to them about some building blocks of intimacy. And we can see why this is so related to trust, because and what's blocking intimacy right here. So some of the building blocks here are about it's about having a lot of understanding and acceptance. It's about having appreciation and and some encouragement when someone else is intimate or open. It's about having some openness to yourself and having some consistency there. And if you look at each of those things, that's exactly what's going to further along elements of trust as well. Because if someone is extending their trust and you're being very understanding of that and you're encouraging that and you're being consistent with that and you're being extending your own trust towards them, isn't that going to aren't you going to build up further and further trust there? You're going to have more certainty that your extension of trust or intimacy is going to be accepted. It's going to be treated well. So when we talk about blocks, then it's the opposite of a lot of this. If there's a lot of rejection, blame, finger pointing, personal attacks, that's going to absolutely shut off intimacy. If there's, as someone is being open, if there is a lot of discouragement or just rejection in general, if they don't feel like there's any reward to being open, it's going to shut that down. If you're being very closed off yourself, it's going to feel odd being very open with someone who's very closed off, and that's going to shut things down. And if you're very inconsistent with any of these other principles, it's not going to feel safe enough to be open or to have that trust there.
Very good. So if you have a question for us while we're here live, go ahead and leave it in the comments and we'd be happy to get to it, specifically if it has to do with trust and intimacy. So now we know what some of the blocks are between spouses when they're wanting to be more intimate. It's often that feeling of security and safety, right? I'm just going to relate this, and it's a silly analogy, but it's on my mind. We just got a new kitten, and I talked about it in our live masterclass the other night. But my 4-year-old is really struggling to earn this little kitten's trust because she is just so wanting to hold it and wanting to, she's kind of smothering it. And that trust factor hasn't happened. And there is a bond between animals and people. So in a way, you could call that like intimacy because that's a connection. But the fact is that the cat is learning which of us it can trust and then it's developing a closer relationship, and it's allowing us to pet it, and it's coming up to us and being our friend. Whereas every time my 4-year-old enters the room, the cat makes a beeline for the shelf, the highest place it can get away from her, because it's all, like Mark said, and that's just the animalistic characteristic, but it's in all of us at some level, that when we don't feel safe, we will not be vulnerable, right? That cat does not feel safe with my 4-year-old, so it is not going to put itself in a position where it can get hurt. So if you're wondering why there is this huge gap between you and your spouse, and why it feels like every time you want to get close to them, they're pulling away, it often comes down to this idea of they just simply don't feel safe. They don't feel secure. And the way to start to get there is through these building blocks and restoring some of that trust. So, Mark, let's go a little bit deeper. What are, well, deeper as in like a teaser for what's to come, but about what these building blocks are, so that our spouse can have that security and therefore allow themselves to be vulnerable with us and to start to build some of that closeness and connection.
So I'm glad you brought this up, because this is a good segue to just kind of mention. I'm going to go a lot deeper in this particular subject in some new material that Heather and I are putting out this coming week. We're opening up a subscription service, with a lot of things that go really in depth and have a lot of good exercises. But just to kind of go over this just a little bit, I'm thinking about a situation that I remember working with a couple a while back, right? I was talking with I was talking with the husband. No, I'm sorry. I was talking with the wife at first. She came on as a client on her own for a while. And the big issue there was this issue of pornography. Her husband looked at pornography. It really hurt her. She didn't feel adequate. She didn't feel good enough. And so we were working on that. Eventually we got the husband on board, and I started talking to him a little bit. And when we got right down to it, there was this huge dynamic of the husband didn't feel like he could be open with his wife about the problem, because she would be very upset with what's going on. She'd feel hurt. She would, say things like, "How could you do this to me?" That, be very angry about it. Now, we could say, okay, she was justified in her reaction there. We could say, oh, you know what? That's what he deserves. He had this problem. He was causing this problem. She should be angry. But I'll tell you, being angry there, pointing the finger at him and blaming him, and essentially, if we get right down to it, discouraging him from sharing of his problem, did not solve the problem. Where this turned around was when we were able to help her have some acceptance of her husband's problem. Not necessarily, acceptance of her husband, not necessarily of the problem, but acceptance of her husband. And having a space where she could encourage him to be open and share his struggles. At that point, when he kind of understood, when there's some consistency with this, and he understood he could go to his wife and talk to her about some of the struggles that he was having, it became easier and easier for him to disclose more, to go to his wife more often. If we had to describe this in another way, it was a more intimate, close relationship because of that, at least on this one aspect. And this is where it really turned around. It was the consistency, it was the acceptance, it was the encouragement that allowed him to be open. Now, I want to contrast that to what they were doing before, and oftentimes I see, in place of these basic building blocks, people use crutches to try to rebuild trust or intimacy.
That's it.
So once trust or intimacy has been broken, let's say with an affair or something else big like that, a lot of times the hurt spouse will lean on things like checking in on phone messages or emails or Facebook. They might even go as far as putting tracking devices into the phone or the car or whatever. And when we look at this, this is all an effort to be safe, to feel that safety. The thing is, these things are not substitutes for that real safety, that, addressing what's really going on there. It's a crutch, and eventually that crutch just isn't going to be useful. If we don't have a truly open situation where, someone isn't forced to be open, forced to disclose things, it's eventually just going to, you have a situation like that, it's eventually going to fall apart as you keep leaning more and more on a crutch and without actually having true trust or intimacy.
Right. So it's solving problems at the deeper level, right? Rather than using one of those crutches. And while that does help bridge the gap initially, right, and setting some healthy boundaries and having some accountability, those things are okay. But like Mark's saying here, that's kind of like the Band-Aid, but eventually the deeper healing is going to have to occur.
Absolutely. I don't want to misconstrue things like, yeah, sure, right at the beginning, crutches are good. You want to make sure that things are safe as soon as you can. But yeah, long term, we want to make sure that things are healed more completely.
Exactly. And one of the problems that we see and the mistakes that happens is that they'll put the Band-Aid on it and that deeper healing never happens. And so they stay stuck in this place of this uncertainty and this need to control. And many times they're there for years and years. Meanwhile, the inner wounds and the wounds in the relationship just kind of fester and they get nastier and nastier. Would you agree?
Absolutely. 100%.
Absolutely. Right. And so that's why it's important to learn like how and when to use some of those Band-Aids, and then how and when is the right time to get to the deeper healing that then brings the lasting change that we really want to have in our relationships. Very good. So Mark, sum it up for us real quick. Again, that high level overview of what builds intimacy. If you can just go through those again real quick, those different steps. And then like Mark mentioned, we will be going deeper into this in our new material that we'll be releasing next week, but we want you to understand the steps that are necessary to get there. So run through those.
Just very basic, 4 things. You have to have acceptance and or understanding. That's item 1. You have to have some encouragement. It has to be rewarding to be open and to be intimate. There has to be some amount of vulnerability from you yourself. That, that reciprocity is going to set the stage. It's going to, it's going to be much more likely that your partner is open if you yourself are open. And number 4, you have to be consistent. And then the breakdown of intimacy or trust is the opposite of all those. It is the rejection. It is the discouragement or punishment for being open. And that might sound obvious, no, you don't want to do that, but we do punish our partners sometimes. Like in my example of the couple with the pornography issue. If you yourself are closed off, that will close off intimacy from your partner. And if there is inconsistency or just a lack of certainty in the situation, that will shut it down. Absolutely.
Right. So just in my mind, I just imagine that scared little kitten over in the corner. Sometimes we kind of feel like that in our own relationships and our own selves. And it's learning to take those small steps forward to feel more safe, to feel more secure, to know that we're going to be okay. And then after that trust has been established and there's that strong foundation there, then you can go deeper and deeper into intimacy and opening up to those different levels of closeness between you and your spouse. I didn't see any questions or comments here, so if you have one, go ahead and drop it in real fast. But as always, if you would like more information on this, we'll be giving that out next week. So if you're interested in that, say, let's see, what should the buzz phrase be?
It's always the default high thrive.
Say yeah, high thrive. Just leave a comment, high thrive, and we'll make sure that we give you the deeper level understanding of this. And we have some great exercises that you can do to apply this into your relationship and take action steps and those baby steps to make sure that you're applying it in the right way and allowing that trust and that intimacy to really build. So awesome. Yeah, you guys are absolutely welcome, and we're grateful to be here. So if you have any other questions for us or want feedback on your own specific situation, then feel free to reach out to Mark and I. We respond to every individual message. Sometimes it's hard for us to get to everyone here in the post in the group because there's simply just so many people. However, if you private message us, then we'd be happy to help you out further there. All right. Well, thank you, Mark. And we will talk to you guys next week, going deeper in how to rebuild trust when it has been broken. All right. Thank you, Mark.